moving, moving. Oh, they're disapproving. Keep them doggies moving, Rawhide.
Well, yeehaw, partner. I'm Cowboy Spencer. This is the Bootu Boys. We are all cowboys here. We all know a lot about Westerns and cowboy history. I'm going to introduce you to my partners. You got Van Lee.
Yeah, get on out of here.
Brian Vaughn, how about your bull lassoing days?
Oh, ain't been as good at bull lassoing since I was deputized on the open range.
Yeah, that's taken quite a bit of your time, I'd imagine.
I mean, the amount of posses I am tasked with forming. By myself, the sheriff doesn't do shit. I'm not going to get into this now.
Yeah.
Yeah, that rank stuff doesn't really make much sense. Doesn't hold up.
You know what I think the best rank is? Captain.
Well,
Yeah.
you don't have to do anything, but you still have power.
You have some authority, but you don't have the decision-making authority.
That's a little bit of a spoiler for next week there.
a little teaser.
I lied. We are not cowboys, and we are not good at Western
you
history.
fooled.
So
Fuck.
that this is not the first time we've done Westerns on Bootu Boys. We typically cover a wide variety of shows if you're just now listening for the first time, but we don't do Westerns very much because we don't like Westerns. And the closest we ever got was, I guess, Dr. Quinn, right? Like that's the...
Hey, dude, I guess.
All right, I suppose.
I think the closest we've been are the two shows that you guys just mentioned, but the closest in terms of television history, weirdly, I feel like would be the Waltons. Like kind of a sprawling, rural type of show.
I can go with that. The setting in Rawhide, although it was filmed in the very end of the 50s and into the mid-60s, is, of course, just after the Civil War. So, like, pioneer days. The Waltons covered, like Great Depression era, but kind of look similar when you get into
the eras
the wild.
are definitely different. It's something
but
about...
you can see it, though. When the
Yeah.
nothingness in the countryside that you get a
Yes.
lot in these, it's kind of there.
Well, it's mostly matte paintings behind a scene or
Of
behind
course.
like a sound stage. And it always cracks me up because usually that's good enough that you're like, oh, I don't even notice. But this one, there were some scenes where it's like, yeah, they're just standing in a big room. That's all they're doing.
I didn't mind, however, Rawhide being so very old, as Van said right before we started recording, 60 years and counting now. And I know this is going to date it when someone listens to this like 50 years from now, I guess.
Yeah,
But yeah, now it's 60 years ago. So the episode quality's not good. There's no such thing as a high definition Rawhide, or you're not going to really see what you're looking at that well. So I didn't mind that the scenery was not always good.
However, every episode is filmed in high definition.
Oh,
So what we typically do before we go into the synopsis, and we've got two, we're going to cover one this weekend about grandma, which I always do. And then we're going to cover a little bit of a different one with a more convoluted plot line next week about Wild Horse and Greyhawk. It's going to be real interesting. But before we do any of that, I'm going to tell you just a little bit about Rawhide and the overview of it and get into a little bit of the cast stuff. And then we'll talk about the episode Grandma and Her Money. What's it actually called? Grandma's Money.
You pretty much had it.
Grandma and Her Money.
Maybe an alternate title could be Grandma's Money and Other People's Money.
She makes it all hers, and she does it in a way where you're kind of fond of her. So this is a CBS show. We've had many CBS shows already because it's a giant. This era actually was so good for CBS that Rawhide wasn't even really that big of a deal for them. They actually had Gunsmoke airing at the same time in this time period, and Gunsmoke is so much more successful than Rawhide.
And that's the blueprint for
Right.
this show.
That went on for 20 years. It's had the same producer, by the way. I've got his name. Let's see, Charles Marquis Warren.
Would have been a lot different if Stephen J. Cannell was the producer of this show. There would have been a PSA at the end and probably more ass.
And probably a description of what the show is during the intro, where someone just says it with a deep voice.
This was a very big time for CBS. So they had, in addition to Gunsmoke and Rawhide, they had the Lucy show, which is the thing after I Love Lucy. And they had Perry Mason. Andy Griffith was on this time period. So they had so many things. And Rawhide was just another show. It aired on Friday nights for most of it. In the last season, which was season 8, they moved it to Tuesday night, but it didn't really take. And that was
no one wants Westerns on Tuesdays.
They also lost their cast lead for season 8 and gave the show to Clint Eastwood, who, of course, the only reason people know Clint Eastwood is from Rawhide. This is what catapulted him into fame. It's like the biggest part about Rawhide is that Clint Eastwood was made a star in this process.
And the Dirty Harry movies, I think, are right after.
Right
this.
after.
And that's,
Yeah.
I think that would be what people, I think, would say, hey, what was he famous for? Dirty Harry's number one.
Definitely.
Rawhide's up there. Because I know it's a very popular show from the time.
I think the number one on the tip of the tongue, Invictus, that soccer movie.
That's the one. What's the one with the boxing lady and he kills her or whatever? $1 Million Baby.
Yeah, with Hilary Swank.
Well, he doesn't kill her, just to clarify.
He directed it. He killed her, Spencer.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Hilary
sure
Swank is dead.
he might have enjoyed the part where Hilary Swank died, but he didn't actually
What a
kill
different
her.
movie that would be if the actual plot consists of Clint Eastwood murdering Hilary Swank.
I would like that better, because I actually thought $1 Million Baby was kind of boring.
I remember thinking it was, solid, but sort of, one of those down the middle dramas.
It really was down the middle.
Could have used a murder.
What about Gran Turismo?
That's a good movie.
That's the game. Torino.
Clint Eastwood's Gran Turismo.
He's driving cars fast.
Next time I want to be in Crazy Taxi.
I actually really liked that movie a lot. A lot of the cast wasn't very experienced, so it seemed like most of the time he was the only competent line reader in his scenes in that movie, but it was a really good movie.
Also, he was the most experienced at being alive by a wide
so old
margin.
and
Still is.
He's got to be the only one in these episodes who is still going.
I would imagine. Unless that little guy who looks like Henry Zabrowski with the beard and he cooks
Buckets or whatever.
Yeah,
that I like that. Wishbone.
Wishbone, yeah.
What's the story, Wishbone? But
Actually,
I could see that guy still being alive.
I take that back. In the episode we do next week, I don't have his name. I think it was Daryl Hickman, the guy who played Matthew Perry, who played Chandler from Friends.
Mm-hmm.
That guy is still alive.
Oh,
Yeah.
I could see it. He was young.
Yeah, he's in his 90s.
He was a little
so.
little baby face, just out of West Point. But that's not this week, Spencer.
Looked a little
No,
like
I'm-
a young Babe Ruth. Anyway.
I'm jumping ahead, but yeah, let's just talk about the cast here and the crew. The drovers is what you call them. The cattle drivers. The basically they're on the trail. They're out there in the wild, and things are dangerous, and they get thirsty a lot. That's the biggest problem in the show. But actually, the star of the show is Eric Fleming, who is Gil Favor. We don't see him this week, but next week he's in a little bit of it.
That's interesting because we don't see him this week and we don't see Clint Eastwood next
Right.
week. So we do get the dual leads.
So
it worked out.
what they did there is, it was really Gil Favor, the guy who's in next week's episode, as played by Eric Fleming. It really is his show. He's the star of the time. But they did start to incorporate some of the gang's individual stories that we'll go into a little bit this week. And they did that a lot more with the rest of the crew as the show went on. But the first several seasons apparently were devoted to one big cattle drive, I guess is what you call them, where they had to get to Sedalia. And until season 3, it's like 60-something episodes, they were still on the way to Sedalia to drop off this cattle.
That explains why every plot synopsis online involves cattle. Because it was
What
one
they
plot
did
line.
is their passion, I guess.
I think you, whether intentional or not, Spencer, you chose 2 episodes that really run the gamut of what Rawhide can do.
And of course, they are just 4 apart, too. They were filmed just a few months, they aired, I should say, a few months apart from each other.
The episodes have almost different casts and certainly different approaches.
Which was kind of
Different feels.
confusing, too, because I don't know who these people are, this Trailblazer cast. Eventually, you learn, oh, that's Wishbone. But right away, you don't know.
The problem is it's just a whole bunch of gray men. It's just a bunch of gray people saying the same gray thing, shaped the same gray way. And yeah, no, I had real problems until I'd seen it like 2 or 3 times.
I would imagine, yeah. You probably had to watch quite a bit, too.
Watching anything, too, in black and white. Like, the clothing loses its texture. Plus, this is the Wild West, so everything is gray or tan.
Dirty.
Yeah, you might see a tumbleweed.
Eric Fleming actually wasn't in the final season of the show. He says it's because they were paying him too much money, but I think they just kind of were ready to try to give Clint Eastwood a chance to take over because he's the right-hand man for the rest of the show, which, by the way, is called the Ramrod, so you guys know.
What's called the Ramrod.
The right-hand man. When you're the foreman of the
Oh.
trail boss, which Clint Eastwood was, you're the Ramrod.
Wow.
So that's his role.
They should just say that then. Not foreman. They should just say, I'm the ramrod.
Different speak in Western
Like,
times.
hey, Ramrod, come hammer this railroad.
Plus, it'd make the world more fun today. Like, oh, I'm involved with the new hospital building that's being added on.
What's your
Oh.
position?
Ramrod. Yeah, the
Oh.
construction ramrod.
Of course.
By the way, a terrible note here. Eric Fleming actually died shortly after Rawhide time period. It was a role he was in because he was a film star and he was filming some kind of canoe scene. It tipped over and he drowned.
Oh,
So
that's
he died
horrible.
at 41, not too long after Rawhide.
This is
Huh.
the sort of stuff that used to happen routinely on film sets that thankfully it doesn't now. I was thinking about this in reference to Alec Baldwin accidentally mmurdering
Yeah.
that poor person, that fortunately we have a lot more rules and kind of steps in place. But this used to be kind of common. And, we would not have stunt people, or we'd have stunt people who were fighting to get a job and they'd be like, I'll just kind of let this fire consume me for a little bit and hope I survive it
Mhm.
because that'll get me the job.
look, we all hate OSHA regulations, but OSHA saves lives, so it's like it's a good thing overall.
So the second lead, Clint Eastwood, he did not die in a canoe accident. He's still going. As of now, Clint Eastwood's in his 90s, still directing movies as we talked about, and still going strong. He's Rowdy Yates, and he's the ramrod. Okay, so at first, he's got a little bit of a temper. He's a young whippersnapper, and he sort of matures over the course of the show and then becomes trail boss in that last season.
Well, he's Mr. fucking wonderful Boy Scout in this episode.
I don't know if he's that wonderful, but we'll talk. He's so annoying.
Yeah, he's obnoxious.
That's a grown lady. Let her live her life, Clint. But anyway, Clint Eastwood, Rowdy Yates, he's the number 2 in command. Other guys, we see just tiny little parts of these people in these episodes, and it's not really even important, but Paul Breiniger is the best way I can think to say that. That was Wishbone.
Oh, okay.
Wishbone is the cook, I guess. He does cooking stuff. He has pots, and they kind of just set up camp wherever and make a fire, and Wishbone does the rest.
That's, of course, before he time travels and learns about George Washington.
And becomes a dog, yes.
Maybe the sassiest character in the show.
Okay, let me posit this. We play around a swap out, and it's this Wishbone in the dog TV show Wishbone. He's the dog, but it's him. It's a man.
So the dog is in Rawhide then?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think I would be even more cynical because my childhood would have contained an elderly man writhing around on the floor pretending to be a dog.
With a bad bandana and a weird beard. He's just an oddly looking man.
I'm here just in time to stop John Wilkes Booth, but I'm too old to get to him.
If only Pete North were here.
Did the dog stop John Wilkes Booth?
Good point.
Was that a real episode of
I
Wishbone?
don't think so.
You know, it could have. Those Jack Russell Terriers are fast.
Just bite him, yeah.
I believe they're called Parson Terriers.
Yeah, they changed it. Parson
Really?
Russell?
Who was Jack Russell? Probably a racist, because that's what always happens.
Sounds like a moonshine maker. Yeah.
He was actually, I believe,
he doesn't know, but do your job.
He was the director of photography in the 50s and 60s. He is Kurt Russell's uncle, Jack Russell.
Excuse me?
Yeah, I made that up.
Okay, but that was your most realistic one.
I know.
And then we've got Trail Scout Pete Nolan, who we see a lot next week, and that's Sheb Woolley. By the way, speaking of Pete Nolan, he leaves the show. And when this episode that we're talking about next week is his return to the show, he hasn't been gone for long, but he actually does leave the show entirely because of, I guess, his army position that he takes. Huh. And they get a new Trail Scout for the rest of the show.
But he was in a lot of episodes.
Up until this point. I think he comes back again in season 7 or something, but he is largely out of the show for a while after this episode and at this point in the show. So they've got a new scout, and I think that is Clay. There's a reference of him here and there in these, but that's Clay Forrester, who was played by Charles H. Gray.
It's basically just mud and water.
Yeah, pretty much.
I saw the name Charles Gray, and the first thing I thought is, this is the Charles Gray that played Blofeld in one James Bond movie, but I looked it up, different Charles Gray, even though I think they're very close in age.
Would have had to have been.
Wait, hold on, I'm sorry to interrupt. Clay Forrester, was that his name?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
Because in Mystery Science Theater 3000, the evil scientist's name is Clayton Forrester.
Maybe it's a Rawhide reference.
It could be, because they love all those old shows like that. Huh.
The only time I think we get anything notable from Clay is in this episode we're about to get into, where they're fighting over who gets the responsibility to do the thing in this first one to pick up the money.
Clay.
And he's like, Clay, you don't have the authority or something like that. I think Wishbone tells him that.
And then Eastwood's like, let me pull my fucking dick out.
Which I have a clip of, because that gives us the idea of who Rowdy Yates is as a man.
Yeah.
Couple other guys here. There's barely in the episodes we covered, but we've got Steve Rains, who played Jim Quince. There's one point where they say Quince in one of these, so that's who that is. And then James Murdoch played Mushy, who is Wishbone's cook assistant, his clumsy cook assistant.
This does tie up a loose end. Van texted me, I believe this was last night or the night before, and said, I think one of these characters is named Mushy.
I heard it, and I was like, surely that's not right. And I didn't want to look it up. So I was
no,
like,
his name is
whatever.
Mushy, and he's the one who has all his 10 thumbs that we talk about next week, where he's dropping those pots.
Yeah, that is, well, we'll talk about it next week. It's like my favorite thing that happens.
The Wild West nicknames are always so absurd. They're like, oh, who's that over there? Well, that's old Wet Rag Johnson. One time he had a wet rag, and now that's his entire existence.
And there are, like, characters you're supposed to take seriously whose names are like Whippoorwill Fart. I don't know. It's a different time, you know?
Yep, sure is. That's the best I can do with getting into the Rawhide cast. They didn't have a giant cast of well-known people, but they did have some pretty notable guest stars, which even the ones we got had capable guest stars in it. over the course of the seasons, they had people such as Dean Martin, Peter Lorre.
He's in his suit holding a drink.
New Year's Eve.
Robert Culp was in one. Also Leonard Nimoy.
Both Columbo guest
Yep.
stars.
And Ed Begley.
Senior.
Not the one we know of.
Yeah, I saw that, and I was like, huh.
I mentioned that Gunsmoke was the CBS Western show, and like Brian said, pretty much the quintessential Western show, period. That show went for 20 seasons, so Rawhide's 7.5 years that it ran didn't quite put it in that category, but there's only a handful of Westerns that even reached this stratosphere.
Gunsmoke had an advantage, too, because apparently it was a radio show, so like it already had a lot of footing and characters.
Which was the case for Father Knows Best, too. When we covered that, it started as a radio show and transitioned to TV.
Let me ask this about Westerns real quick, because they were once the movie genre. Like there would be 150 Westerns made a year. When did that stop? Was that the 80s? Because there was a time where you couldn't have anything less than 10 Westerns come out in a year.
I really feel like the peak would have been the 60s, like
That's
about
what I
now.
think too.
Yeah.
But I think
and then we had kind of the
stuck for a
spaghetti
while.
Western period then and after, too, in the 70s. Even the late 80s, early 90s, you had like the comedy ones.
And the Italian directed ones, which were really poorly made.
And yeah, a lot of those are the spaghetti Westerns.
Oh,
and
yeah.
then, you know, because it's kind of a racist thing to say when you think about it.
Although spaghetti is nothing to be ashamed of for your culture.
No, it is not.
Just understood what that means this second.
My dad had talked to me about that like years ago, so that's the only reason I knew what that was.
I do appreciate that Italian horror is often called giallo instead of meatball scares.
You appreciate not being called meatball scares?
Yeah, good point. They should call it meatball scares. But in the early 90s, also, there was like Tombstone, Unforgiven.
Which is
like
Clint
the late
Eastwood,
80s,
or at
early
least
90s, yeah.
Unforgiven was Clint Eastwood directed.
But
Like
I
that
think-
Metallica song.
I think now the Westerns arrive only in waves because maybe 15 years ago, I feel like that happened. There was the 310 to Yuma remake and a couple others.
Which was just okay.
Yeah.
Every now and then I can get in the mood for like a well-made Western.
Yeah,
And,
but it's not often.
No, the remake of True Grit like 12 years ago was quite
pretty damn good.
I really
It was
enjoyed
excellent.
it. Only because it was so funny though. Like I don't care that much about the Western setting as a general rule. But sometimes if they do it well, I'm not opposed to a Western.
A couple of recent Westerns that off the top of my head that I did like recent. Not really that recent. I'm an old man now.
2004.
Yeah, well, like Bone Tomahawk from probably
That's
2015.
surprisingly good.
That was a good and terrifying movie. And then the other one, The Sisters Brothers with John C. Reilly from like 5 years ago.
I didn't see that.
I heard
It's
that's pretty
really good. You'd both like it. It's funny too.
By the way, there's also Bonanza, of course, which was an NBC, I guess, sort of competitor to Gunsmoke. And
That was a Western?
Yeah,
Huh.
it went for 14 years, so it didn't
Okay.
quite hit Gunsmoke's, but it's probably the second most well-known old-timey show of that era.
Which it sounds like a children's like fun hour with a clown. Bonanza!
NBC also had Wagon Train, which ran for just a little longer than Rawhide, and all in the same time period, by the way. So these shows were all on in the same era, and Wagon Train went for a full 8 years, so it just did edge out Rawhide 7.5. Those are the cream of the crop Westerns right there, and Rawhide is on the list, but it's not at the top of it. They didn't really do, like awards or anything like that, so it's just a relatively well-received show that has mostly held up for the theme song.
With Westerns being popular right at the advent of television, it kind of proves nostalgia has just always been a thing in entertainment.
It's funny to me, we all knew the theme song and didn't know it was Rawhide.
No.
All these years.
I thought it was the Walmart
Yep.
commercial.
The actual song, having analyzed it now, it's a lot more fun than I remembered it being. That
Yeah.
singer is drunk, I think.
He's having a good time. And there's more variance than I thought. I thought it was just going to be quick, blunt, gets through the da-da-da-da Rawhide, and that was it. But then there's a whole bunch of some guy going,
Yeah, kind of scatting.
I almost was going to open the episode, but I don't think enough people will get the reference saying, no, this isn't a Walmart commercial. But no, I think that was like 20 years ago now,
Probably.
that Walmart did
Did it
that.
even happen? Who can say?
You say that, though, but every now and then I will be surprised because for the longest time, I've thought the only people who really remember the Pizza Rolls jingle from 1994 were Brian and I. But there was another very popular podcast I was listening to, as an improv one.
Do you mean the Bagel Bites?
The Bagel Bites, that's
jingle?
it. Yeah,
Okay.
pizza in the morning, pizza in the evening, etc. And he made jokes about that. And I'm like, holy shit, people do remember this stuff. So
Probably an NPR podcast. They
Yeah.
were probably talking about the Bagel Bites jingle.
Garrison Keillor talking about Bagel Bites. Yep.
Even I actually did not know that one until you guys.
Mm.
You made So many references to that over the years that I do know it now, but I don't remember seeing that on TV.
I wonder if it was on Nickelodeon a lot or something, that
Could be.
commercial.
That would
I
make
absolutely do
sense.
think that's it. Like, I can picture Rocco's Modern Life in a Bagel Bites commercial.
Yeah, because it's established BTB canon that Spencer did not have a big Nickelodeon childhood, whereas Van and I, it's like all we did.
Yeah.
Lived on it. Let's get into Grandma's money, guys.
Whoa.
Oh, boy.
Oh, look at what you're suggesting
It's
here.
what she's afraid everyone's going to do.
You know what, though? I do need to say that it is an honor to yet again do another grandma-centric episode with you at the helm,
Yeah.
Spencer.
I do it well. I'm a grandma guy.
Yeah.
This needs to continually be a thing
Yes.
now, by the way, now that it's happened twice.
I think we need to get you a mug or a T-shirt that says Grandma's Boy.
Okay.
It's so ironic seeing as how I never had a grandma. They were both dead by the time I entered
You
the
do
world.
now. I think this one becomes your surrogate
Well,
grandma.
I don't know if I think they would all have to join forces. Like I'd have to also claim the Walton's grandma too.
Yeah.
Is like a
Well,
communal.
but you need to. You need your maternal and
Community
paternal grandmother.
And I'll add more to the list over time. And the only thing I was sad about, like I joked about when we revealed that I was going to do these, is that there was no scary episode I could pick after
That's
that.
true, a Halloween one. Mm-hmm.
I got something to say up top. This grandma kicks the shit out of the last one. This grandma is wheeling and dealing. She's clever. She's not paranoid for real. She's deceptive. This grandma's got a lot going on.
How old did you guys think she was?
70.
The actual,
Yeah,
the
70,
actual lady.
72.
Yeah, so I think they tried to make her look quite a bit more old and frail, but this lady was barely 60, Josephine Hudson, who played her.
Oh, okay.
So they definitely tried to play on her age for being a grandma when she wasn't truly that old.
I would like to say Van and I aren't wrong because 60 in 1960
Oh, yeah.
is 70 now, basically.
Like 100. So the guest stars besides her, Josephine Hutchinson. I might have been saying that wrong this whole time. Josephine Hutchinson.
Rolling in her grave.
And then Jonathan Hole was the one.
Hole?
Yeah, that's
Just
how it's-
H-O-L-E
That's how
Hole.
it's spelled. It might be like Hole or something, or
John Hole.
Jonathan Holly, or I don't know. There might be a more glamorous way to say it, but I'm reading Jonathan Hole when I see that name. And he's the one who played Ames, Otis Ames.
Yeah, I think that guy is Jonathan Hole.
Yeah. Now that you mention it. And I heard he's full of beans and broken dreams.
Possibly even a more memorable Eames. They are spelled the same way, by the way.
Are they? Okay.
Yeah, I thought it was Eames, but they say Ames in this episode. And then Frank Wilcox was Colonel A.G., who we see a little bit of at the beginning and end.
He's funny. I'm not kidding. I think that guy knows what he's doing.
He's so stiff. It works. Grandma's Money aired February 23rd, 1962, just for some context there. And again, this is season 4 of Rawhide, so it had already been on for quite a while. It's about halfway into its run.
I'm picturing a family gathering around their dumb old TV.
That's massive and tiny at the same
Yeah.
time.
The synopsis for Grandma's Money here: sent to collect payments for cattle, of course. That's not in there, but that's all they do in the show. Rowdy assists a sweet elderly woman hiding her larcenous profession. The first scene here, we get a little bit of the gang, but we don't know really who these people are. At least we don't. It's just kind of a side shot with Rowdy and Wishbone and Clay, and they're arranging some kind of deal to look for Colonel A.G., and they're dropping off some cattle, and they're going to get the payment for him, but we don't get Colonel A.G. We get Hank Higgins, the Colonel's foreman, or Ramrod, as we learn the Western.
Now,
time
isn't
period.
this the guy that taught My Fair Lady how to be one? Hank Higgins? Is that guy's name? Henry Higgins, sorry.
Well, I mean, Hank and Henry are the same name, right?
Oh, they
So,
are, yeah.
Holy
technically
shit.
speaking,
Damn,
yeah.
Spencer.
So
Why
maybe
not?
this is the same guy.
Rowdy lets Hank Higgins know that they've got that 300 head of cattle that it was promised Colonel A.G. He contracted for it in Waco, as he says, and Higgins doesn't really know anything about that. So Higgins figures he must have gotten too caught up in his honeymoon plans because he's a newlywed.
Oh, you see, I've married Miss Penelope something or other because I got over the fact that she had that little boy traveling with her. Is this anything?
I'm not getting it.
Magnum P.I., Higgins,
Oh!
Okay.
Yeah.
Man, there are a lot of Higginses throughout
too,
pop
which
culture.
is a lot.
Yeah. Then you got that baseball player, Bobby Higginson.
Mm.
They can't track down A.G., being that he is very busy on his honeymoon. But they have a plan here, which is Rowdy says, "Hey, Higgins, you signed for this. Can you do that?" And Higgins can. It's like, "But I can't handle the money. I can sign this, but I can't give you any money." Well, that's no good. So Rowdy says, "Well, okay, I'll bring the signed receipt to Colonel A.G., and then I'll just get the money from him. Will that work?" "Yeah, that's fine." So all they need to do at this point is to take that signed receipt and ride into Indian Springs to meet up with Colonel A.G. in person.
Maybe have a mud bath.
Honestly, I wouldn't mind. Would you guys take a mud
I'd
bath?
like to try
I
it.
would try it.
I'd try it.
There's some brief infighting here where Rowdy's crew kind of doesn't know who should be responsible for taking this money to Colonel Agee, and they all want to do it, but listen, we need to get to know what kind of person Rowdy is, what kind of person a young, hot-headed Clint Eastwood is, so let's listen in on this conversation.
Now, if Favor were here, I'm sure you'd agree with me that I'm the logical one to go.
Look, when Mr. Favor isn't here, I'm boss of this outfit, and me being boss of this outfit, I'm going to pick the man who goes. And I'm picking me.
Well, that's just kind of settles it, doesn't it?
Nothing you can do about it once the man has spoken. I would not want the responsibility of carrying a tiny sheet of paper, like a bunch of miles, and that is like worth hundreds of cattle.
That's why you never made it as a ramrod.
I tried, though. In my 20s, that's kind of what my 20s are about.
Well, when she hit 30, you're past ramrodding age.
Yeah, I think you got to get ramrodding out of your system young, so then you can focus on what really matters. Podcasting about ramrodding.
Perfect.
So do you guys hear the Clint Eastwood in that?
Oh,
the,
yeah.
The young Clint Eastwood, do you hear current Clint Eastwood in that voice?
It's just a lot more, there's more spring to it.
Yeah, he's actually speaking instead of whispering.
Yeah.
He's a lot more precise, less mumbly, which I actually think I prefer mumbly, edgier sounding Clint Eastwood.
Yeah, there's actually kind of I think a golden era that his voice hit, and he's just past it now, but...
No, now it is like a white noise signal from another dimension.
For a little while, he had the raspy kind of Western thing down where it was even more effective than what we hear as a young man in these episodes.
Wishbone, other guy, I'm the one who's going to take the money to Indian Springs, but I will leave my ape Clyde with you. Because he did bum fights with the ape.
Of course.
Rowdy is the one who gets to go to Indian Springs for the money. And along the way, he's just off to Indian Springs, I guess. And immediately he runs into an elderly woman. She's in a carriage and it's stuck in the mud. He thinks that's an old lady. She needs my help. So the old lady whips out a rifle and fires at him a few times. She doesn't actually make contact, but I'm sure he hears the bullets whistling by his head because he knows like something's a little odd here. But this is the first moment of the show here where he responds to what the old lady, who we'll soon know is grandma, what she is doing is for some reason something that is his business and his concern. Instead of being like, fuck, that old lady shot at me, I'm going to leave. I'm going to hide and get out of here. He's like, I'm going to go talk to that old lady. I got to figure out why she's shooting at me.
Yeah, we're supposed to believe that Rowdy is the most chivalrous man alive, and he's going to help this old woman no matter what the cost, even if it means taking a bullet to the face. But this is also our first sign that this ain't your daddy's grandma. This is a wild grandma.
Well, when you find a grandma in the wild, they tend not to be domesticated.
Grandmas in captivity can't grow as big either.
Right. Well, they don't have as much of a diet, that sort of thing. They don't live as long, but,
Well, but then
freer.
all the tricks at the grandma shows, too, the balancing of the beach ball on the nose, the fucking jumping through hoops, those take a toll.
And as she said, she doesn't really need to learn new tricks because she's already learned them all.
The
Old
beach ball
dogs,
thing.
they've learned every single trick there is.
And here's the thing. As we're talking, this is not related to Rawhide, but Brian was talking, and I don't think you did this on purpose. But you put your hand on your head and you're wiping your hair, and you went like this at me.
Oh, I put an L on my forehead?
Yeah, so
that was not on purpose,
I
but
looked
now
to
I
my
wish
left,
it was.
and fucking Brian's giving me
Calling
the
you a
L on the
loser.
forehead thing. And I'm like, I agree, but come on, be nice.
Be civil. We're friends.
We're on the same team here. Grandma.
So despite having just been shot at, Rowdy tells her he needs to help her. It's like, look, let's get your carriage out of the mud, old lady. He explains he's just passing through on his way to Indian Springs. The old lady says, well, I am going to Indian Springs too, so I guess I'll let you help me. My name's Abigail Briggs.
Oh, she does say her name.
Yeah, we're
because
not going
guess
to
what?
call
We
her.
don't hear it ever again.
And we're not going to call her Abigail Briggs.
No.
This is grandma.
It's Grandma. That's who this is. Pretty soon, he will be calling her Grandma too, by the way. I don't think he ever does say Abigail at any point in this
Not
episode.
once, yeah.
No, her gaslighting is very specific to get him to call her grandma, too, I think.
Well, and she's immediately got a little story to spin here, which is she tells him she just narrowly escaped a run-in with some thieves. Rowdy says, don't worry, you're safe now that I'm here. Rowdy's got you. And he pulls her carriage free with his bare hands, just rips it out of the mud, and she's very grateful. Grandma's planning on taking the stage east to St. Louis from Indian Springs, where she's going to visit her daughter and grandchildren. Rowdy says, well, I'd better come with you, since somehow you're my responsibility now. Grandma protests. I can do this on my own, Rowdy. But he says, no, I'm just going to have to commandeer your coach, and we're going to go to Indian Springs together.
This is like the first time you hear the chorus of a song. Grandma says, I'm going to do this. And Clint Eastwood says, no, I'm going to follow you. And she says, please do something else.
And then he follows her.
Yeah.
Grandma, I know better than you about everything.
That the only other clip that I put in this one toward the end is, for some reason, to me, hilarious. Recording it made me laugh. Because you can even hear the glass clink against her teeth, where he's like, you fucking drink that shit, Grandma.
Bangs it into her face.
It's a great, like, this is where Clint Eastwood got famous moment here. It's like shoving a glass into Grandma's face. So now that they've committed to this trip to Indian Springs together, they do a little bonding, kind of learn each other's backstories, and they talk a little bit about her family. Grandma mentions old people are more of a burden than anything else, unless they've got enough money to stay useful.
Amen.
And thankfully, Grandma is carrying all her life savings with her, so she's all set there.
She sure is ready to just say that to anyone and everyone. Like, I have a massive amount of money right here.
I assume that she must just genuinely be proud of what she does.
That's okay, yeah.
And at this point, of course, we don't know. We just think Grandma is a kindly old lady who is what she says she is, and that's just her life savings that she's carrying with her.
Rowdy should have kind of been suspicious the second Grandma said, go have fun, which is not something old people say to young people.
So they get to talking about her children, and kind of where her life has taken her over the years. And she mentions a son who was killed in a shooting accident who just happens to look a lot like Rowdy. You know, his hair was kind of brown like yours, just a real specific color there.
He had an orangutan on his shoulder.
She shows him an 1860s picture of her son and points out that his hair was like Rowdy's, and they talk about how...
Oh, short and brown. Yeah, no one has that.
And wearing a hat, probably, as everyone did then. They talk about how, oh man, Rowdy, you're just like my own child, and you should really think of me as your grandma and a family member. That's not in there, but it's definitely implied that she's trying to get him to be real familiar with her.
And here, I've already said to myself, so we're not going to talk about he was accidentally shot. We're just going to leave that story as is.
It happened all the time in the 1860s. That's just like saying old age.
Okay.
Yeah, they just glossed right over that. And Rowdy didn't even blink.
He's like, sure.
He was gunned down violently. Rowdy's like, well, of course.
It wasn't an ape, was it?
So while they're stopped and chatting, by the way, the bandits, as we think they are, return, and they fire at the carriage. Rowdy jumps off and sends Grandma along and fires back. We get a close-up on the bandits, and they're talking about what an incredibly accurate shot Rowdy is.
I assume there was a dead body somewhere then?
I was wondering that too. It's like, oh, he sure is good at hitting the trees and scaring us because they're fine.
This is only slightly more like buried than the Renegade intro in saying, our main character is so cool.
It's not even a natural way they discuss it,
no,
too. Like
it is forced.
That old lady, and I knew she had a young partner helping her to be able to steal all that money.
I didn't expect him to be such a good shot and so caring and nurturing.
It's so impressive he went and helped her.
And the career he's going to have after this in film.
So Rowdy returns to Grandma after all this. He's completely unharmed, but he is concerned the bandits are pretty well tucked away in their hiding spot there, and they're not going to be able to bring them down from that current position. So Grandma, for the first of many times in this episode, has a very smart plan, which is, let's just leave the carriage here as bait, and we'll go to Indian Springs on the horse instead.
That's what I do with rental cars, too.
Yeah,
when the bandits come at you, you just leave them wherever. I mean,
no one minds. Who's going to come after you? Avis? Hertz?
So Rowdy's impressed that she's so clever, and this is where she does her little line about old dogs. They've learned all the tricks, and they don't need to learn new ones. In the next scene, we meet Colonel Agee at the nearby sheriff's office, and the sheriff expresses his regrets that the honeymoon got delayed by those troublesome thieves, and he says, well, the old lady and that young fella who are behind it all, they're a couple of no-good fuckers. And just as Colonel Agee's about to reward the sheriff with a cash payment, which is odd, but I guess
like a tip, maybe?
Something that you could do with law enforcement at that time. His new wife, who we find out in the beginning of the episode is young enough to be his daughter, screams from the carriage that her jewels are missing. She tries to call him Colonel instead of his name, Horatio.
Which is great. I think this scene is kind of funny because it really plays up that this clueless colonel has just married this younger bride not really knowing her, and she doesn't really know him either and was probably forced into it.
Sure.
But she's just like, Colonel, even though that's her husband.
Call me Horatio.
But the show doesn't try to make this normal. It does make fun of that sort of forced arrangement.
Very much so. Yeah, the tone in both of these is better than I would have thought.
Oh,
Agreed.
yeah.
Totally agree.
100%. And you know tonight when they make it to the Wheat Indian Hotel or whatever it's called, they are going to have a marathon of sex.
It's the
Oh, yeah.
Wayside Hotel, just so you know.
Wayside? Okay.
That's where they're headed.
You don't get the name Horatio without being able to do it.
Do you think during sex he makes her call him Colonel?
Oh,
Yeah.
I bet.
I mean, that's what I
Or
do
at
if I
least
were
that
Colonel.
that part of him that's doing the business is the Colonel.
Oh, okay.
I'll tell you. Yeah,
Attention.
And I was going to say, the Colonel does rise to attention.
The Colonel AG realizes the bandits escaped thanks to this news, with the jewels having been stolen, and demands to be contacted at the Wayside Hotel as soon as there's news to report. He's less pleased with law enforcement.
And there is an important detail about the man who's with the old woman.
He's
And by the
young
way,
and hot.
this does tell us that we now know for sure Grandma's bad
Right.
or really good, honestly. But we learn that the very good, nurturing man who's with the old woman is riding a blaze face horse.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. I just wanted to say that out loud. That's all.
So I didn't know what it is or how to spell it or anything else. I
It's
didn't.
what
so it's
you
a type
think.
of horse.
Yeah, I guess.
Blaze
Yeah, I looked it up.
face.
Let me find it here. I don't have any information about it. It's just, it's
But
the
you did
pattern on
write
the
it down.
face.
Okay.
Yeah, that's all it is.
So it looks like a blaze.
Yeah, it looks like it's on fire.
No, I'll tell you what my note is. Can we talk about how cool the term blaze face is for a horse? I also feel it could be used as a Native American slur,
Oh, no. But yeah.
but if we keep it in the cool aspect, works great.
It's time for Rowdy and Grandma to arrive at Indian Springs, and Grandma's already eager to be rid of Rowdy at this point and hop on her stage east. Rowdy's really not feeling that same rush. He's kind of wanting to relax a little bit now that he's settled in Indian Springs, and he mentions he needs to meet with Colonel AG anyway, and that's going to be a little bit. Grandma has not heard him mention like what he's actually doing so much in Indian Springs, so when he says Colonel AG, she gets a little bit of a fright for obvious reasons, but can't reveal that name means anything to her or why she would be scared to hear that. So she has to pretend, oh, I'm just scared my belongings are going to get stolen again. I really need to get out of here.
Really, she could just say, I'm an old woman. And every man in the town would be like, whatever it is that she did, it's what an old woman does because they're too afraid to think about what women are.
Right. Throughout the episode, everyone just believes whatever she says because of that sort of sexism that some people I think would think was not that, but it is.
The hotel clerk mentions that Colonel AG is not here yet. They've been delayed, but the bridal suite's still being held for him. Rowdy's officially got nothing left to do but wait. And Grandma finds out, much to her dismay, that the next stage to St. Louis isn't for a whole 2 days.
But
So-
that's Thursday.
So Rowdy's like, Grandma, you don't have anything to do either. We're just going to sit here in Indian Springs for 2 days.
I'm going to watch you like a fucking hawk.
This is the first scene, speaking of that, Van, where Rowdy exhibits his willingness to guide people around physically.
Yeah, he grabs a hold
By
of
their
everyone.
arm, their lapels, whatever it takes to just move them to where he wants them in the shot.
Do you think that that's just the thing like Clint Eastwood wanted to do with his character? Like, I should be this kind of guy?
Yeah, I don't think that's in the stage
If
directions.
you look at Clint Eastwood at this time, he just looks like he would do that.
Right.
I just get that sense
And
from
he's
him.
big, he's tall. I don't know how tall he is, but let me say this. He's taller than everyone here. I
Right.
don't know if that means he's tall or not.
I think
but
he is. Like, probably, I don't know. If I had to guess, he looks like a good 6'2". He's lean, too. So I don't know, he just has that commanding presence where he looks like he wants to kind of be the alpha guy in every room, which I'm sure is a Rowdy Yates thing, but also a Clint Eastwood thing.
Sure, I mean, they're kind of one and the same.
This reminds me that part of the reason why he didn't work as trail boss is his character really didn't end up having any depth. Like nobody cared about him because it was just a one-dimensional hothead.
To your point, Gil's in the next episode, and his
Gil's
character's
cool.
way more interesting.
You're right, it totally is.
Well, that's just applicable to the whole episode. The entire thing is way more interesting than this one.
Rowdy's the
despite
worst.
Grandma.
Rowdy's just the worst character.
Yeah, because he's too good.
Grandma rules. I mean, you don't know what she's gonna do.
I'm glad it worked out where we got a whole episode of Clint Eastwood, and then,
That's
now we
enough.
know what Rowdy is from this whole thing.
Rowdy is just the hero archetype, which I guess a lot of people love, or it wouldn't still be like the driving force of media.
So Grandma's master fear and claim that it's her belongings she's worried about, which Rowdy says, like, well, that's fine. We got a safe here. We can put that shit in. And Grandma says, I'm not putting my belongings in that cracker box of a safe. Rowdy asks for a room right next to Grandma so he can keep her safe. and says, make sure there's an adjoining room in there.
I, at this juncture, was slightly concerned about where the plot was going. It doesn't go that way, though. But he's hanging all over and is like, no, I want the room right next to hers.
They couldn't have done it with Rowdy, but I wish this had been like a double cross thing where not only is Grandma bad, but so is Rowdy. And he was trying to get her stuff back.
That'd be great.
Before we go any deeper into the plot here, let's take a short break. So now that we've settled into the Wayside Hotel, we get a little bit of a lighthearted moment, a little comedy to mix it up since it's been so intense. Rowdy's checking out Grandma's room for her to make sure she's safe and jiggling on the doorknob of a connecting room, make sure it's locked and that nobody's going to jump in there and steal from Grandma. All the while, unbeknownst to them, there's actually a guest in that room, and he is hopping mad that someone's trying to break into his room, at least from his perspective. So Grandma is, at the moment, she's assured, it seems like it's fine. Rowdy says, no one's in there and you're safe. And all the while, our guest in that next room, Otis Ames, who, by the way, is the Western representative of the Cutler Harness Company.
He's quick to tell everyone that.
Is entering the room with a gun and just furious at what he thinks are thieves trying to break in his room. Rowdy says, hey, I was only checking to make sure no one broke into this room. The man says, hey, I'm Otis Ames. I'm the Western representative of the Cutler Harness Company, and I don't like being called a thief. And the Grandma says, hey, we don't like that either.
It should be noted he's like a foot shorter than Grandma even, and his hand is visibly quivering with the gun, which is a detail I liked.
It's a nice little attempt at macho as he points his little pistol at Rowdy's chest.
And I think all black and white Westerns, be it television shows or movies, have to have one weird little goofball with a thin, wispy mustache. It is a clown. It's the clown character of this show. And I think he fills the role just fine.
It's good. It's one of the better parts of this episode. Rowdy responds by telling Ames, I had to throw you out this fucking window, you being this way. And Ames says, you better not. I got a gun. So Rowdy has enough of him. He grabs him by the ear and just tosses him out of the room, spanks him. It's a light admonishment as opposed to anything major.
It is the biggest, shameful exit from a room you could possibly do when in a confrontation, to be basically pushed out like a little boy. Just get in the fucking hall. I'm so not afraid of you that you can point a gun at me and I'll still basically flick you like a paper football back into your own room.
Grandma loves it, by the way. She's just eating that up and laughing and says, well, I don't think he'll be back in here. Grandma, by the way, she is laughing, but then immediately with that situation resolved, starts trying to get rid of Rowdy again, which is, again, most of what she's doing in this whole episode. This time, Rowdy actually is agreeing on it. She says, actually, Grandma, I wouldn't mind going out and seeing what Indian Springs is like.
I'm sure there's a lot to see. I bet all these towns have such different attractions, different saloons with murderous vigilantes in them.
That's apparently a big part of Rawhide, is the big towns they get into in the middle of their travels and the troubles they have in those towns.
I saw that in one, Rowdy visits the Space Needle.
Does he get some psychiatric advice from the radio?
Well, he might at this very hotel, actually.
Grandma watches him go, gathers her things, and heads out.
And, she hates to see him go, but loves watching him walk away.
Oh, yeah, she does. She's thinking to herself, one day, this guy's going to be in another Clint Eastwood movie that none of these guys on the podcast have mentioned yet. I really thought I was going to come up with one before I got to the end of the sentence.
Oh, yeah. No, I'm just not that familiar with his catalog, I guess.
I bet you I'm as unfamiliar with his catalog as I am anyone of his stature in the film industry, even though I've seen some of them. I mean, he is a big looming figure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, okay, I got it. That one time that he had a chair in the middle of the room and nobody was in it, and then he addressed it for an hour.
Well, that was awful.
When he was yelling about, Mr. President, I don't like you, and you're not even here.
Wasn't this one of his big conservative rants?
Yeah, I believe it was Obama that was supposed to be in the chair that he was yelling at.
He might have thought Obama was in that chair, to be fair. By the time Obama was elected, Clint Eastwood was already 140.
Mm-hmm. And it's at this moment that I reveal, my girlfriend Katie has revealed to me that there was, in fact, a reality television show featuring Clint Eastwood's family.
What?
And occasionally Clint Eastwood would show up.
Okay, I have heard a little bit about this because I know that his son comes off really well in that show, apparently.
And she said something like a lot of them are awful. She mentioned that occasionally he would show up on the show just shambling in the background, and that was it. He really didn't have a whole lot to do with it, but occasionally was there.
I'm surprised they didn't want to direct that too. take the wheel.
My mind is blown by this. I guess it makes sense. You're the family of him. You kind of want some creative real estate of your own.
Yeah, the actual name of the show was Mrs. Eastwood and Company, because it did focus on her, of course, more than him.
I would have rather seen a Mrs. Doubtfire style movie with Clint Eastwood called Mrs. Eastwood.
That's awesome. I mean, why didn't that happen?
My bosoms have exploded.
What's the matter, kids? Why won't you eat your breakfast? I'm your regular nanny.
Robin Williams narrowly beat Clint Eastwood for that role.
Same with Mork and Mindy.
Yeah.
Clint Eastwood was almost Mork from Mork.
Nanu.
He was also almost Jack.
So after a commercial break in 1962, within the show, Grandma has wandered off to Eagle Livery and Sales Stable, which I made a point to write down that little store because
Love the name.
That's a thing.
I also wish we could have seen the commercials.
The grandma is in secret already trying to set up a way to leave, and she's got a stage ride to Juniper Junction that leaves in just a few hours, and kind of like a secondary route to St. Louis that might not be as efficient, but at least she's able to get out of Indian Springs right away and not
Right, she doesn't have to
Rowdy.
wait 2 more days. And I also like the detail, like the visual of Grandma peeking out her window until she sees Rowdy's horse get past the plane of view.
Well,
So
she's
she can
checking
go
out his
talk to
ass.
this guy. Well, that too, and probably the horse's ass. That's a big ass.
Their plan is foiled because Rowdy is never very far away from Grandma in this episode, and he immediately comes back, finds her, and interrupts. Rowdy cancels the carriage on her behalf and insists, "You're gonna wait the 2 days for the stage out of Indian Springs. It's better guarded here, and I am going to make that decision for you."
He's very upbeat about it, though, so this isn't supposed to be stomping all over her.
No.
But that's exactly what it is, and it's very frustrating to see over and over and over again.
He then informs Grandma that she's hungry and that it's time for them to stuff themselves with a big dinner at the nearby inn. This is a nearby diner. We don't know a lot about it, but there's a server named Jane, and they have real nice food, and it's the place to be when you eat in Indian Springs. Rowdy has ordered Grandma just a ton of food and settled in so he can watch her eat it because
So
he didn't
weird.
order any for himself.
And it's all just gray, lumpy food. We don't know what each dish is. It looks disgusting.
There is a plank of something on Grandma's plate of dark that just, it's so big.
I would-
Aspic.
I would imagine that really is as good as it's going to get in 1860s. You know, when you're in some random.
Completely
In.
disagree, because from what I've heard, Wishbone can do wonders in the kitchen.
You've not lived until you've tried Wishbone's duck confit.
In the middle of all this eating, Grandma decides Rowdy needs to help her do some of this too. So she sends Jane, "Go get another plate." And the meal concludes. They're both full. They've eaten all these mounds of food at the Indian Springs diner. And Grandma says, "I can barely keep my eyes open. I am so sleepy," and starts kind of slowly nudging Rowdy and Jane toward each other. And Rowdy suspects, "Okay, Grandma, you're getting rid of me again, aren't you?" And Jane's like, "Grandma, yeah, you're awesome. If I were Rowdy, I wouldn't want to leave your company either."
Shocking amount of Grandma trying to do some like pimp work in this episode. Just really wild.
At this point in the episode, though, is where Grandma is really kind of like, "Rowdy, you've got to leave me alone or my plan, you're going to keep ruining this for me." And she's getting increasingly kind of impatient with him. However, an opportunity arises because they do head upstairs together. Grandma's kind of given up for now. Rowdy spots a poker game that's going on in the main area.
Big saloon where all the rough and tumble cowboys hang out.
All the
And
rough
Booth, I saw Booth was playing in
Freddie
this game.
K, right? Yeah.
and Ames. Ames is also in there, and he's cleaning up in that poker game. Rowdy looks over there and's like, "Damn, Grandma, if I was in that game, I probably lost my shirt by now." So it's
She
good.
wishes.
It's good that I've had you around and I've had to watch over you instead. Grandma has now cooked up another scheme as she watches them play poker and sees Ames with his winnings.
I didn't expect this at all. I thought the episode was just about Grandma maintaining what she already took.
Oh no.
I didn't know she was just basically like, if opportunity's there, seize the day.
I was impressed by how quick she thinks.
Yeah,
It's
she's
amazing.
bright.
So she sees this and then gets the wheels are turned in her head. And she's like, "Rowdy, I am not tired anymore. I want a brandy." Rowdy's like, a brandy? Grandma, you can't do that. You can't have a brandy. She's like, "Why not? Women are allowed in a
Yeah,
saloon."
it's also a tonic for old folks. She
It
says
calms
that.
you down. She says women are allowed if escorted, and holds out her arm for Rowdy to escort her.
Which he'll gladly do. I mean, wrap the arm around, grab a lapel, shove. He
Just
loves
whatever.
touching.
So when they settle into the saloon and Rowdy orders a couple brandies to kind of like an unbelieving bartender a little bit. Doesn't seem like I guess women probably didn't order a lot of alcohol at saloons back then is sort of the joke in that scene.
We know our other grandma wouldn't. She didn't like drinking.
Oh, that's true.
She took it away from those spinsters and wouldn't let Grandpa have it when Grandpa read her notes.
The Baldwin sisters and their secret recipe, yeah.
Yeah, this grandma would have none of that.
If this grandma were in the Waltons, she would have shot Grandpa Walton.
Old Zeb, poor Zeb. In the middle of ordering these brandies, Grandma pretends to kind of look over at Ames for the first time, even though he's actually been her prime focus, and says, you know what, Rowdy, we ought to order another brandy and get Ames over here to bury the hatchet from earlier. That misunderstanding was kind of something we should smooth over.
Sure, I'll invite the cowardly man over for a drink. Let me just grab him and violently drag him over here against his will.
That's the great part here is that Rowdy is like, okay, fine, we'll get him a drink, and he orders an extra brandy that presumably he's paying for Ames, and then goes and shoves him over to join them. Like, I bought you a drink, and then beats the shit out of him in the process. Ames is actually okay with this, though, now, and I think he is just as eager to clear the air as they are, and doesn't seem to mind being manhandled by Rowdy this time. And he's talking about how this is just as much my fault as it was yours, so all's forgiven. We're good now. We get another hint of just how seasoned of a con artist Grandma is. In the midst of clearly putting medicine, which she's pretending is her own, but is actually sleeping pills that she's going to drug.
Yeah, we should add Grandma Roofies, people.
Under the guise of, oh, it's for my heart. She's in the process of putting her pills into the drink. She happens to notice a cut purse, some sort of criminal woman who's walking by Ames and
stumbles on top of him.
Stealthily steals his watch right off his person. Grandma catches this while she's doing the drinks with her other hand, pokes the lady with her knitting needles to get her to scream and release the watch, and then gives it back to Ames and says, Hop, look what almost happened here.
This is so intricate. I assume Grandma did that, right?
I don't think so. I think she really, the waitress was really trying to steal it.
I don't like
too.
that as much at all.
Yeah, I watched it a couple of times, and I think that's what it is.
I thought the same thing, Brian, that she was trying to frame him so she would build credibility for herself.
Because right away she's able to use this and be like, see, hotels are, like we all always think, dens of thieves.
But no, this lady really was a con artist herself that was trying to steal Ames's watch.
Yeah,
and
that's
she just catches it.
a little overstuffed.
Well, let's put it this way then. Grandma is so quick on her feet that something comes up, boom, she uses it to her advantage.
In the middle of drugging him,
true.
She was already doing her own thing, and she's like, I'm going to stop this and do that at the same time. I was
Drug
impressed.
with one hand, stop stealing
Stop
with the
crime
other.
with the
Why
other.
would you even go into a saloon with the amount of crimes that could be perpetrated against you?
And there's a line here I genuinely laughed at where Ames says, those girls will steal anything, and Grandma says, that's how I lost my first husband.
Grandma's amazing. Ames is rattled by this, but he is relieved that Grandma caught this in time and that he got to keep his watch. He's so grateful, in fact, that he doesn't even notice when she switches those drinks and gives him the tainted beverage. Rowdy asks Ames how he plans on keeping those winnings safe the whole night, considering, as Brian's mentioned, look what's fucking going on in this hotel. What are you going to do with all that money you just won in poker?
This might as well be that hotel in Identity that John Cusack is in. That goes even worse.
They'll die pretty much. Ames isn't taking chances. He's just going to put it straight into the hotel safe, which immediately, of course, would ruin Grandma's plans. So she has to talk him out of it through masterful manipulation, which is, that's a safe's a cracker box. You don't want to put it in that, Ames. Put it under your pillow. It'll be much safer there.
Yeah, because earlier, Ames, you really showed you could defend yourself against a potential criminal.
By getting flung into the hallway.
I love how easily Grandma can convince Ames of anything.
Ames
and Rowdy.
Ames is perhaps not the most strong-willed guy,
No,
as we've
or
learned.
strong.
He is the Western representative of the cutler and harness business, though. So
Pretty good at poker, too, apparently.
I guess. He must have gotten lucky hand.
This guy must sell a fuckload of harnesses. To be like, they're sending him out there. I feel like if I'm this man's boss and I send him out, 50-50 I expect him to ever come back.
I wonder, maybe he's really bad at his job and they send him out here on purpose, hoping he doesn't come back.
That could be.
Okay.
Because maybe they have, another candidate waiting in the wings and they don't really have a fireable offense for Ames yet.
But then he Michael Scotts it and comes back with a ton of money and a bunch of contracts for harness salesmanship.
Well, I guess we have to keep him around.
It's just like how at the end of Tommy Boy, when Chris Farley sells all those brake pads, that's Ames. He sells all those harnesses to Rowdy. Rowdy's like, I'll take 200 of your finest harnesses.
I think Ames could have cut it on Saturday Night Live, too.
Him and the Colonel.
Yeah.
They'd be great scene partners.
Maybe he could be with Horatio Sands instead of Horatio Agee.
The sleeping pills have already taken effect, by the way. Ames is very sleepy immediately, and Grandma pretends that she is having that same problem. With the drinks having concluded, they all head upstairs to get some sleep. Well, as we know, Rowdy and Ames head upstairs to get to sleep, and Grandma stays wide awake and doing some evil knitting in her bed just to kind of pass the time, but she looks very... I didn't trust her when I saw her doing that.
There's nothing like a good scheme and knit.
She's a bit shifty-eyed. When you watch her looking around the room, you start to see that devious personality
She
come
has to be
out.
the wheels. They always have to be turning for her to pull all this stuff off.
I like that she has this ordinary old woman hobby that she's always doing. Well, you know what's going on in her head. It's a perfect disconnect.
And it's also an early version of like, you know how sometimes like a superhero villain will have like an umbrella or something they carry, like the penguin they carry around, but it has a practical purpose.
Mhm.
So does the knitting needle.
Yeah, it sure does.
As we find out, first thing the next morning, we get another scene of Grandma outside trying to get away, and Rowdy catching her from a distance and immediately going in to try to intercede. Except this time, Rowdy is intercepted along the way because Ames has alerted the local law enforcement that he woke up with a light wallet. He's just furious about this, and he thinks Rowdy and Grandma are in on it. They must have set him up last night just to rob him.
I bet they're in cahoots. That's what he's thinking. That cahoots seems like a word of this time.
Absolutely.
Good word, too.
And I will say that seems to be the conclusion that is drawn repeatedly in this episode as Rowdy's helping that old lady out.
Again, they can't possibly see Grandma acting of her own volition and committing all of these mastermind crimes.
In this scene here, Grandma, I guess, may have been able to conclude her transaction, but actually pauses it so that she can go defend Rowdy from being accused of thievery, which perhaps this is the first sense that they're trying to give the viewer of maybe Grandma is a con artist, but maybe she also does care about Rowdy a little bit.
The show doesn't give that away completely because at this juncture I wondered, is that it, or does she need Rowdy to be on her side as sort of a cover, as protection, because he's so willing to defend her? Now, at the end, we find out, but at this point, I think the show disguises
It's subtle.
it.
Yeah, it's not clear why she did it, but I did get the sense and wonder why she didn't take that opportunity to just do whatever she was going to do, because that's perfect. Rowdy was distracted, so you would think she would have been able to conclude her business. But she does go over to the sheriff and say, Rowdy is not a bad guy. If he wanted to steal from someone, he could have stolen from me at any point in the last day, and he didn't. So you should just listen to me. Rowdy's awesome. She even says, like, look at that fucking face. Look how nice he looks. And the sheriff's like, well,
You're right, he's a good-looking man.
his hot ass too, Grandma. No, so he tells...
I'm sorry, Rowdy. I should have never questioned you. You're a hunk.
He tells Ames, look, it's possible that it didn't go the way you think it did, right? Ames is like, I don't know, maybe. And they're like, all right, Rowdy, just don't leave town. We're going to look into some other options that we didn't do before we accused you, and we're going to make sure that nothing else is going on
I
here.
love this casual legal approach of like, you might have done something wrong. You're not leaving, are you? No, I'll be around. Okay, just kind of get a hold of me whenever. We'll circle back around to this theft.
It is a great concept for today, especially considering you can just leave whenever you want.
Yeah.
In that time period, it probably would have been hard to leave town without somebody noticing.
Right.
So you
so
could
few
probably
people.
do that. You could be like, oh, you just tell me before you go. Now that Rowdy's safe from arrest, he turns his attention back to Grandma. Scolds her. You were trying to get away again, weren't you, Grandma? And this time he just takes her life savings belongings, which, as we know, now has Colonel Agee's whatever she took from him, plus all of Ames's poker winnings and this growing fund of hers. And he takes the whole thing from her. He's like, I'm putting this in the fucking bank, Grandma.
Because Rowdy thinks that's the whole deal with Grandma. She's just really needs to get out of town because she's worried someone will steal the money, not she's worried someone will catch her for stealing the money.
To a fortune that's growing even larger than she knew it was
By
gonna
the
be.
hour.
So
It's about to get bigger.
Grandma is very reluctant at first because there's like a little joke in here about old people not trusting safes and banks and stuff that I think they're doing with Grandma a few times. Because when he says he's putting it in the bank, she goes, not the bank, and just seems very stressed about it.
I don't even think the FDIC exists yet.
I definitely have breast cancer.
Grandma Claudette.
That's a thing, though, because, if you think about the old trope, if you will, of the old person.
Put under your pillow for real.
Exactly. You put it under your mattress, you bury it in the backyard, which is such an absurd concept. And there are stories of, like, somebody's grandma dies, they donate her bed, and at the whatever thrift store they find, $10,000 in cash.
In the mattress
Yeah,
or something.
so I'd buy it.
I would be really afraid to put my money under the pillow because of tooth fairy stuff.
Oh,
You don't want
shit.
the tooth fairy coming in and thinking that's their payment.
She leaves you a nickel and takes your fucking $10,000 or whatever.
I think you're looking at it wrong. I think you leave her a tooth, she gives you money. You leave money, she gives you teeth.
Okay, and
You
grandma
said-
might need
the
those.
reverse
True.
transaction.
And you got $1,000 under there. You got $1,000 worth of teeth.
So, okay, this is interesting. So basically, under the pillow is some sort of teeth bartering system,
Yeah.
regardless, at all times.
Teeth is the central construct of this system.
And I always read in all those finance books that I was going through that you really shouldn't put your money in drawers and pillows because you don't get any interest on that pillow.
No.
Your pillow's
Oh.
not collecting any interest. It's not even keeping up with inflation.
Was there anything about teeth in that, though?
Is Dave Ramsey so probably? Yeah, he talks a lot about teeth.
Well, I was watching Jim Kramer when he was talking about
Oh, he
the,
does
the
too.
teeth
He's
and all
always
that. Yeah.
invest in teeth. It's a big stock. It's gonna go up crazy.
Well,
today.
it's kind of like gold, right? Is like teeth are always here.
Yeah.
It's true too. It is.
Interesting.
So yeah, Grandma is reluctant about this bank at first, but once she gets an eye on the safe that they're going to be putting the belongings in, that changes everything for her.
By the way, this scene is super clever too.
Mm-hmm.
Grandma's got her eye on what's in that safe and realizes I can add this to my possessions and is now okay with this idea.
And she also asked questions like, "Oh, so you keep piles of money in there, huh? And gold, and you just leave the jewelry in the safe."
Yeah,
And
she's casing the place.
Mhm.
And Grandma is at this point considering herself a snowball rolling downhill, collecting more snow as she goes.
Snowball is also a good, viable method of paying off your debts. You start with the small ones and then you gather momentum and you pay off the bigger ones later.
Right, and
Dave Ramsey said that.
Yeah.
well, it was in there with the teeth
Yeah,
stuff.
it's some-
Snowball also not a bad nickname for an old person because of the white hair.
or cocaine.
So yeah, Grandma's questions here are pretty actually well disguised. She's trying to be like, I just want to know what your system is so I know my money's safe. But, what do? I suppose you just lock it up at night. You just leave it in there.
Probably just leave an old man.
Yeah,
here,
you
right?
have anyone
Yeah.
watching the safe? I
You
mean,
probably have a
what's your
crack
system?
security team.
And then we get to meet Pop, who, by the way, is the crack security team. Don't be fooled by the fact that he's a snowball. He's the best shot in the West or something like that.
I'd like to talk about Pop for a moment.
All right, talk about Pop.
I think he's 90 or so.
Yeah.
At
He
least.
looks like a bipedal vulture. But to me,
He's the best shot
the
in
big
town.
notable thing about Pop is I look at this man and more than any other character in the show, when color TV came around, I don't think this guy looks any different in black and white or color.
Nothing changes. He's still very gray the whole
Yeah.
time. Is his name Pop?
Name's Pop.
Or is that a nickname? So they named a baby Pop at some point. I don't care for that.
It's very possible it's a nickname, but we only know him as Pop.
True.
And it might be a thing where they don't have a last name, like Prince
just
or
Pop.
Madonna,
Mm.
Pop. And then Jane, his granddaughter, or daughter actually,
Daughter,
which
yeah.
I'd like to address that later, but also might just have one name. They don't say a last name.
That's what comes up next is Grandma gets real nosy under the guise of just being interested in Pop. Like, well, you don't even leave. You don't stop guarding the safe to eat. And Pop's like, nope, my daughter comes and brings me food. She works at the restaurant nearby.
Ma'am, my life is a living hell dedicated to guarding this safe 24/7.
And Grandma just happens to know because she met Jane last night. She's like, oh, well, that wouldn't be Jane, would it? I actually thought Grandma was really convincing in this whole part.
She was.
And
She's
nothing
great.
sounded awkward, even though she's getting all the information she needs to pull off a master heist.
Because grandmas ask all sorts of inane questions. This would check out.
It fits, yeah.
So Grandma's got her plan pretty well secured already, and she's happy to leave her money in the safe. To kind of get her plan started here to make sure that she's ready for the thing later, decides to take over the safe herself. And the bank manager allows her to do this. She's like, okay, let's just go ahead and close this fucker up for the night and get going.
You're just grabbing at stuff.
Shuts the safe.
Overzealous.
And the bank manager lets her shut it and then says, Grandma, you're really not supposed to do that. We leave the safe open during business hours. Grandma, of course, is like, oh shit, I didn't know. I'm sorry.
But let me go ahead and make small talk like watch you do the combination.
And that he just opens it so directly in front of her. In
Does
front
it
of
shield
everyone.
his hand at all?
He's too busy bragging about what a good lock it is. It's like, this lock fucking rules, and you're going to watch me do it and knit it combination into your fabric as you watch.
I want to know what her pattern is that she can 6, and is she knitting literally the letter or the numbers, or does she have a system of 3 loops equals? It's
She's
it's
been doing
amazing.
this forever. She probably does have a really good system. I
Mhm.
also think this bank man prattling on and on about the safe and the lock. This is like a tech guy showing you his thing he bought now. Only it's just like a safe, because that was tech then.
I do like either way, too, with Grandma's situation, because she can actually do numbers. She's an amazing knitter, which I bet she is. Or if she's got like a system, she's created her own little language for numbers, that also is awesome.
I think it's possible that's the case, too, because later she kind of does let on she's a card counter.
Mhm.
And she also has to kind of decipher her own knitting later, it seems like, when she goes back to look at the safe later.
Well, what if then she uses her system or whatever, which means you wouldn't necessarily knit the way you would knit if you're making something properly. That means that her knitting is so bad because there's gaps and holes or whatever because she's doing patterns.
So she is just a terrible knitter.
But that would
Yeah.
also be a thing where then people look at it like, oh, Grandma, that's ugly. And she could be like, oh, the arthritis, not the theft. It's just arthritis. No scheming.
So with this whole thing set up really well, and back outside, Grandma's wheels are turning in her head. She's really trying to figure out, how can I bring this whole thing home? And she suggests, Rowdy, we're going to have another dinner tonight. This time it's my treat.
I'll sit and watch you eat a big slab of meat.
I guess that's what you did back then, is you took turns being the
Having
one who watched.
dinner every other day I get to eat.
Rowdy decides that Grandma should get a mud bath at some point before the meal, and she says, well, I'm not going to do it unless you get one too, Rowdy, which apparently is a taboo thing for men.
Oh, I'm masculine and male, and I don't do that. I like football.
If people, which didn't exist.
1860s
If
football.
anyone walks up and sees me in this mud bath, they're going to think I'm into Wishbone.
I'm not allowed to have good skin.
Well, guess what? Clint Eastwood is the only one going into that mud bath.
Yeah, we don't see Grandma doing it. We almost see Ames.
Because they have gendered mud bathrooms.
Now there's the ladies'
Oh.
mud
we
bath.
see Grandma just walk right by that shit when Clint Eastwood walks in.
Well, her plan, of course, is to let Rowdy go take his mud bath, and then she's going to use that time to set up her escape once again.
At the livery.
At Eagle Livery and Sales Stable. She's going to renew those negotiations, and the guy there, the clerk, whoever's responsible for dealing with the liveries, is like, hey, I've gotten this carriage ready for you like 5 times now, and you keep canceling it. I'm sick of this.
It's honestly a huge pain in the ass. I have paying customers.
And Grandma's like, I swear, this time is the time I'm actually going to do it. And if I get up early enough, Rowdy won't be able to stop me. I think she's being pretty open with
Very
this guy
transparent.
that Rowdy is just the only reason I haven't left yet. It's his fault, not mine. As Van mentioned, before we get the grandma scene, there is one thing in the mud house I have to mention, which is Ames is also using the services at the same time, and he hands over his possessions to the clerk in the mud house and says, now you keep these safe, looking at Rowdy, because Rowdy's a thief in his mind, and Rowdy kicks mud at him, and it's real funny.
And it causes Ames to just leave forever, too. He's like, mud has been slung. I need to leave this room. No more mud bath for me, because I've got mud on me?
Did you?
Not the right kind of mud, Brian.
Yeah, it seems
it's the slightly
like
different
the
wrong
point
mud.
of the
Wrong
mud bath.
context, I guess. It's not relaxing when you get it kicked
It's
on you.
aggressively mudded.
Are you guys sold on Ames as the comedic relief in this episode? Or are you like, yeah, he did it. He did his job, nailed it.
I mean, he did his job of what was asked of him. It doesn't mean what was asked was funny to begin with.
Right.
But he did it.
He's fine. I think
Yeah.
I prefer the comedic stylings of Grandma.
Or the Colonel,
Sure.
who's real goofy. We
Real
like him.
goofy. Yeah. Real broad, real goofy.
Old hilarious Horatio, that's what they like to call him. At dinner later, Grandma is busy shoveling pie down Rowdy's throat, insisting while he eats the pie that Jane bring him a slice of cake. In addition
It's
to
the biggest piece of cake I've ever seen in my life.
I've never even heard of a thing where when you're eating pie and someone's like, get some cake too. It's
Yeah.
like, it's really, it's not, you don't have both, Grandma, you have either or.
Rowdy has like 14 plates, like several courses just piled around him.
Yeah, there's a mountain of food they've already gone through in addition to the dessert of cake and pie, which again really bothers me. You don't say like, all right, time for dessert where we have our cake
Yeah,
and our pie.
That is a redundancy.
They can have their cake and pie and eat it too.
No one eats it really.
So this giant meal almost concluded. Grandma has a real masterful touch here to finish up everything, where she forces Rowdy into a date with Jane. She's been working on this the entire episode, and she finally makes it happen through A lot of manipulations,
She
but
starts out with Jane looks hot tonight.
the best part here is she actually she almost uses the sympathy card. Hey, Jane, your old man Pop is real hot. An old lady like me, we get kind of lonely, and I think Pop's a nice looking man. I would like to be the one to bring him dinner so I can talk to him.
And you deserve a break to hang out with Rowdy,
It's
someone your own
perfect.
age-ish.
And they can't really turn it down because then that's robbing grandma of fucking Pop.
Mhm.
So they
That's
have to go on
That
with
is
it.
the ingenuity, is they would feel bad about what they're doing to her if they say no.
So it gets Jane out of the way, gets Rowdy and Jane out of the way and them doing their own thing, and gets her to be the one to bring the meal to Pop so she can drug Pop, which she does that to everyone, and then finish off her bank caper. It's actually pretty impressive. Way to go, Grandma.
I just want to see her in her hotel room working this all out, and she's got like a blackboard with arrows pointing every which way, and like
codexes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Grandma's actually the original Pinkerton agency person. It's worth noting, too, that when Rowdy does give in and decide, okay, fine, I'll just go on this date with Jane, when he gets up and tells Jane, all right, we ought to go off and be alone together, he's still chewing on his fucking cake. Like, he's not even swallowed yet. He's like, come on, Jane, let's go on our hot date.
Right after she also said, like, I've got a lot of closing up I need to do. That does not happen.
It doesn't seem like either one of them really is that into the idea, honestly.
maybe I'll kiss you and you'll get cake in your mouth then.
You said it's good. You'll like it.
At the bank, Grandma is on to her next hidden agenda wine and dine. This one with Pop, and she's pumping him full of coffee. And since we've seen the rest of this, we know that if someone's drinking a beverage around Grandma, it's drugged.
She's getting roofied.
So we know that Pop is not long for the world, at least for tonight.
Well, to your point, a guy that age, I'd be really afraid to drug that guy.
It
Heart
doesn't-
won't start.
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem kind of counterproductive to use coffee to drug someone? Because
Yeah,
the
would
coffee
they counterbalance?
It would counteract the sleeping pill a little bit. So while she's poisoning Pop, Rowdy and Jane are on their date, and it's going really well, despite how we talked about they didn't really, either one of them seem to want to do it. They stop mid-walk for a steamy kiss because there really isn't much dialogue leading up to the kiss at all.
The dialogue that's there is, I have urges. And that's it. That's really all they
Rowdy,
say.
what happens on the trail?
And then Jane's like, well, are you interested in anything else? And Rowdy's like, yeah, if you know what I mean. And they get that steamy kiss in, and Van's joke earlier I actually have in my notes, which is Jane gets some of the diner cake in her mouth in the process.
This brings to mind a question I hadn't really ever thought about because I found this really awkward and stilted.
Mhm.
Clint Eastwood, I don't know that he's like a good romantic actor. I don't know that that's ever been in his skill set.
Has he ever done like a romantic comedy? Oh, that would be so bad.
He's like the only old actor not to do that, and I think there's a reason. I think he knows.
I can't really have chemistry with anything but a gun.
Well, when he fell asleep in that hotel and he thought the girl was coming over to him, but then it turns out it was his ape Clyde,
Yeah.
that was pretty hot.
That's true.
I like how because of you admitted it, your small Clint Eastwood references, it keeps coming back to the ape.
It's
To every which
technically
way
that's
but
two
loose.
movies.
Yeah.
They had two, so it's not just coming back to one well.
My favorite part of that whole thing is it's probably the one thing Clint Eastwood himself would least like you
Yes.
to identify
I would
with him
imagine,
with,
almost certainly.
which makes it really satisfying to me.
So I actually thought that for the time period, the kiss was pretty aggressive.
Yeah.
It was, yeah.
That looked pretty modern, and I wouldn't have thought that would be on TV. Like, it was so dainty back then, and Clint Eastwood definitely went for the kill in that kiss.
And they stopped there, but I think the implication is that they bang
I'm pretty sure, because he didn't get back till late that night. This
and
is
talk
so
about
pretty early.
urges and all that. So,
And this is
yeah.
back when a roll in the hay meant that.
Literally.
Yeah.
So in the process of them doing that, Grandma is concluding her plan where she steals yet more money and has left the bank, presumably having no problem. We do get a quick scene where she uses her knitting to open the safe like we talked about earlier, but we've already kind of covered that. She cracks right into that safe, gets the money, no problem there. The problem arises when she leaves and runs into the sheriff, who thankfully doesn't suspect a thing. And he does suggest, Grandma, it's a little late for you to be out here. He certainly doesn't think she just got finished robbing the bank after drugging Pop.
Here, let me carry your bag. Boy, this is heavy. Oh, well.
They do the old joke, like, what do you got in here? Bricks? And she makes the joke of, no, money, gold, solid gold, like what it really is. And they're like, ha, ha, ha.
You're
laughing
just
about
a
it.
stupid old woman. That's not possible.
And she cackles a lot.
I don't understand why Grandma, because it was Grandma's idea, can you escort me back and hold on to my belongings? why Grandma wanted him to. Is it genuinely too heavy
It
for her?
feels to me like a serial killer sending a letter to the police.
like
Like
a
Yeah.
little proud
showing
bluff.
off.
A little
Yeah.
of that, and also a little bit of like, if I were guilty, I wouldn't.
I
hand
wouldn't
you
do this.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah, she's ballsy, and it makes it more believable. Back at the hotel, and I think pretty much a lot later in the evening, Rowdy has returned from his date, like we talked about. He notices that even though it's much later, Grandma's light is still on. So he stops in to say hello, which of course you do after a long date and a fuck.
I bet he smells good.
You come in and you say hi to Grandma, who has been, I guess, working on a goodbye knitting gift for him of some kind.
Thong underwear.
She mentioned when they very first meet.
Is it the hat?
a scarf? Because
That's
he
right.
said, yeah, he says, I don't need a hat. And she offers to knit him a scarf.
Okay.
Oh yeah,
Good.
because he finds a bullet hole in his hat.
Right.
Because she shot his hat.
Happens to all of us.
Some kind of goodbye knitting gift is all I could tell. And she's like, Rowdy, I want to give you this gift now. Keep in mind, to Rowdy, this is just another night here and she's not leaving yet. But
Right.
to Grandma, she is. And she's really being kind of obvious about that. And Rowdy's dumb, so he doesn't notice. He's kind of like, oh, yeah, sure, I'll take your goodbye gift now, Grandma, even though you're going to be here for several more days. And she's like, you know what? Go get us a couple glasses. Let's have a nightcap and a goodbye drink. And Rowdy says, well, Grandma, goodbye. I'm going to see you tomorrow. It's like, I meant good night, Rowdy.
Oops. And clearly you're not putting two and two together.
No,
Rowdy.
Rowdy's like, oh, okay, cool. Yeah. So that's what I figured you meant.
Makes sense.
So Grandma is a little sloppy here, though. She's, her biggest plans that she's done are awesome. She's done those perfectly. This here, I guess her best is behind her because she rushes to drug the drinks. And Rowdy comes right back in the room when she's not even done drugging them yet. And he's like, what's that? Oh, it's just more of my medicine, Rowdy. No big deal. Oh, okay. So he gives her the drink. Grandma hastily tries to hand him the drugged one, but it hasn't been long enough for the pills to dissolve. So Rowdy brings it up to his face, and it's like, Grandma, there's a bunch of shit in this drink. Did you give me the one with your medicine? And Grandma's forced to be like, oh, yeah, no, I must have made a mistake, and tries to get out of drinking it entirely because she knows that she's about to drug herself. Rowdy's not having that.
Now, the doc wouldn't have given you this stuff if it wasn't right for you, Grandma. Come on.
Rowdy, please, you don't understand.
I understand perfectly. Now, come on, drink this up before I pour it down your little throat.
Rowdy.
Last thing in the world I'd want is anything to happen to you.
She gasps.
It was just a really scary scene out of context, and especially when he's like, no, drink it up before something happens to
Hearing just the audio made it scarier for some reason.
It's far worse just hearing it.
and separated from actually watching the episode.
you. I still think that should be like when they mix a bunch of clips of Clint Eastwood's career and say, what a great
For like his
job.
Oscars in memoriam when he
that
passes
should be-
away.
That should be on there as like his finest moment or one of them.
That and like, oh, Clyde, that feels good.
Let's go do some bum fights.
It's just all dialogue from the 8 movies.
Your fur is so orange.
Turns out the Do You Feel Lucky line is to the ape that he's talking to. And now that Grandma's inadvertently drugged herself, and Rowdy will be waking to his usual fully alert self in the morning, Grandma's plans are fucking ruined. Fast forward to the next morning where the bank manager is furious at Pop for sleeping on the job. Pop, by the way, is all disheveled and clearly the drugs have not worn off yet. He's still at the bank and he hasn't gotten out of the chair that he slept
I
in.
don't know why they think they're like, this is impossible. This 100-year-old man fell asleep in the night.
I guess Pop is usually a really good security guard. Has he murdered several people in the past that have tried to break in?
They
or
said he's
something?
like the best shot in the town.
But how does he need to be there? He's always in the bank. He doesn't leave.
Oh,
it
I think he's just shooting whoever
through the window
and
from
saying
across
they were going to
town.
rob the bank.
Yeah, no, they took jewels, I think.
Pop shot a kid. It's horrible.
I just figured since he never leaves the bank, even if someone stole it, he wouldn't have to be that good a shot because he'd be right there. So it just doesn't make sense. Something about Pop doesn't add up, guys.
A lot.
Jane's there too, trying to help Pop get himself together and wake up fully and get dressed, gather himself. The sheriff bursts in the room and asks the bank manager, who fucking did this? He looks out the window, points to Rowdy. The sheriff isn't surprised because they've already been going through this whole thing. And the two march up to Rowdy's just as he's in the middle of buying a goodbye present of his own for Grandma.
He asks for something that would be good for an elderly type woman.
Real specific there, Rowdy.
I did chuckle at that description.
It's kind of sweet, though.
It is,
Rowdy's
sure.
wanting to make sure he reciprocates Grandma's gift.
Lock-picking set.
Maybe I should have opened Grandma's gift, actually.
I was going to say, what if Rowdy's just really dumb and tries to re-gift the same thing she just gave him? I knitted this for you, Grandma. The sheriff tells Rowdy, you're under arrest for looting the vault for $10,000. I didn't do the math. That's a lot of money in 1860, whatever.
Probably $4 billion. Who knows?
So Rowdy spots one of the bandits in the middle of this big showdown with the police and says, hey, you don't need to arrest me. That's the guy who I was shooting at when this whole thing started. He's the bad guy. He's a bandit.
Look at that dapper man who's wandering around with a young girl. That's clearly
And
a
looks like he's
bandit.
afraid to step in the dirt.
Sheriff says, that man's no outlaw. Rowdy's already running after him himself and pulling him off the horse and yelling at him and saying, you're a bandit. I know you are a bandit. And the fight gets broken up. The sheriff says, Rowdy, that's not a bandit. That's Colonel A.G.
What? This scene is funny.
That's Horatio.
Horatio here does some actual good physical acting. When Clint Eastwood grabs him by the lapels and Horatio is like waving his arms and flailing his horsewhip at him.
that little crop thing.
Yeah, it looks like an aristocrat trying to fend off a person who could really beat them up.
I did not check, but the Frank Wilcox guy who plays Colonel A.G., I'm assuming is a legitimate actor because
I
he
think
definitely
so.
does a good job. You're
He's
right.
really fun in this. Only gets a couple of scenes.
I almost called him Fred Wilcox. Wasn't that the guy, the comedian guy who died recently?
That sounds so familiar. Fred Willard.
Willard, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
That guy is super funny and
Yeah,
dead now.
he's great.
Miss him, even when he's jerking off in Hollywood.
Speaking of which, Paul Rubens died.
Yeah. Everybody who jerks off in Hollywood dies.
Yeah, and they're funny people.
Exactly.
Someone else died too that was
Jerking off in
Hollywood.
theaters.
no, they didn't do that. I don't know why they died. It's so weird. Oh, the guy from Better Call Saul and
Yes.
Breaking Bad. Saul
Mark
Oh,
Douglas.
yeah.
Mark
Mark
something.
Marker.
Yeah, he's dead. No more Hector Salamanca.
Ding, ding, ding.
So now that we know this man who Rowdy thought was a bandit is actually Colonel A.G., Rowdy learns what we've known all along, which is the Colonel didn't steal the carriage. I don't know why that's so funny.
Because it's a stupid sentence.
It wasn't the Colonel who stole the carriage, but rather Grandma who stole the carriage from him.
That sentence got stupider as you went along, but it's absolutely correct.
Rowdy proclaims his innocence, saying he didn't rob a bank, and in fact, the whole reason he's even here at all was to see Colonel A.G., so he really has had nothing to do with this part of it. He wasn't working with Grandma.
You know what's weird to me is he doesn't pull that receipt out right now.
That's true. It'd be
I
good
feel like that would
evidence.
be the real proof. It's signed by Higgins.
The sheriff confiscates Rowdy's gift from Grandma, only to discover some of that money from the bank. It's inside it.
Like a big wad. I guess he thought this was like a chainmail scarf. That would be heavy.
So Grandma's framed Rowdy. It wasn't just a gift from the heart. That was this is going to frame you and put you.
You're implicated in this crime now.
You stole from the
But
bank.
you could also view it as he's not going to discover this till after we part, and this is kind of a gift to him.
That's kind of the way I'm leaning.
I
'cause
really do think you can.
She loves him because of the son.
You don't think she
thing.
was setting him up?
Well, I think still at this point in the episode, this is another duality we don't know the answer to. I think it's really well written in that way.
That's great. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
And I may be wrong. I may be giving the show too much credit, but I really do
I
think
don't
there's
know,
no way
though.
to read it 100%.
This one is pretty layered, so you
Yeah.
could be right on that. Usually, you're reaching on those.
Usually
things.
I'm doing this while winking, but in this case, I'm not.
So in the process of discovering this piece of evidence, which makes Rowdy look really guilty, Jane is disgusted and says, "Oh, Rowdy, you really had me fooled when you kissed me and made me eat your cake."
I can't believe I let you soil my lips, Rowdy.
She says, "You sure have me fooled. The same way Grandma fooled Pop. You guys deserve each other. They take Rowdy off to
You
jail."
seductresses.
Inside the hotel, Grandma actually hasn't left yet. She's still there. She hasn't managed to leave. She's kind of still getting herself together, kind of like Pop was. I assume that's because that she drugged herself, right? So she's still
And
hanging
she's
around.
Clearly has some complicated emotions going on in her head right
Seeing
now.
Rowdy go through all this, yeah.
Yeah, because she looks out the window and sees that he's being arrested, and that kind of hits her harder than she expected.
Yeah, and shortly after she looks at that locket with the picture of her son.
Who looks
kind of-
just like, he had the same hair color.
Yeah,
as
brown.
Rowdy.
Short and brown.
Kind of
Mhm.
brown. You know, and next she hears the law enforcement's going to be searching for her outside the room in the hotel. So she hides in one of those adjoining rooms that we talked about earlier. come to think of it, that could have really worked well. If it's like a maze, like we were talking about, she could have just gone through all the adjoining rooms. They never would have found her.
And that's kind of what she's able to do, I guess. She's probably in Ames's room.
Well, they only check one room, though. But yeah, she must be in Ames because they go in the one room. They're like, she's not here. She's gone. She's gotten away. It's clear.
She's not directly in front of me, so clearly she has escaped.
Not the best law enforcement, but with her skipping town, that leaves Rowdy to take the rap completely on his own. And Grandma, we got a close-up here where it's very obvious. There's no more, is she, isn't she? Grandma's very conflicted about leaving Rowdy to his fate.
Now she knows she's fucked up a little bit. The sheriff also at this point says, I think, some advice we can all live by, which is, there's only one thing tougher than a buzzard, an old one.
My favorite part about this is that the first time I watched it was on Pluto, and so I had the captioning on, and they couldn't understand him saying old one, so it just says, there's one thing worse than a buzzard, it's inaudible. Which makes me remember, this will date when we're recording this, Rudy Giuliani's sexts that have come to light.
I think that could be any time, probably.
True. A transcript of like a sex tape was revealed. Spencer, have you seen this?
I didn't read too much into it, but yeah, I saw the headlines.
Yeah, so essentially it's him being sexy with this former assistant.
Interesting choice of adjective.
Well, the words he said were, I want to claim these tits. I want to claim these tits. These are my tits. No one else can have these tits.
Real Casanova.
Pretty hot.
Yeah.
Oh, anyway, because there's an inaudible in there. Which who knows what Rudy Giuliani was mumbling.
I don't think I want to know.
Something about claiming tits.
I think I would need a shower if I knew.
So for our final scene, we're inside the jail. Rowdy's already there, of course, but who enters other than Grandma herself? She comes in and she approaches Rowdy in his cell. She apologizes to him for everything. But Rowdy at this point, for once, has a reasonable reaction. Is like, Grandma, you are horrible. Like this whole thing has been a lie. I'm in jail. And I hate you. I'm not going to forgive you.
I actually I like Grandma, don't like Rowdy. I like that he's like, I gave you the benefit of the doubt 50 times, and now I can't.
The Grandma confesses, yeah, okay, fine, Rowdy. I'm not entirely who I claim to be. I'm not some nice, sweet old lady. I used to be a gunslinger, and tells like my husband murdered 10 people, and I don't know, I had a really rough life. And
she mentioned being a card shark in here somewhere when she's talking about her old.
Lots of stuff. It was basically like, fine, Rowdy, I'm a career criminal.
But it does explain why she's so good at such a varied assortment of skills.
And if you're that good at it, you probably should do it. Grandma's just born for the life of crime.
It's like that guy who pretended to be the FBI, and then they made a Leonardo DiCaprio movie about him.
Oh, yeah.
But then it turns out, we found out that all of it's fake and none of it's real.
Oh, the Tom Hanks Catch Me If You Can.
That's not real?
No.
I have no
his
idea.
whole thing is like almost entirely
You know
fabricated.
what, though, is I've heard people say the argument of like, this ruins the movie. It's not a movie I care anything about one way or another. I thought it was okay. But I don't see how that ruins the movie for you. Most movies aren't based on a true story.
And if they say it is, it's
not. Yeah, you're exaggerating anyway. So to me, it's like, it does make it maybe ring more hollow, but it shouldn't probably change your enjoyment level.
Makes sense. The stuff they were saying that guy got away with is hard to believe in
it
any
was
era.
Nuts.
It turns out he just completely made it up, and he was doing a thing where he was getting paid to give speaking engagements to teach people how to, catch criminals. But it turns out everything he said was a lie, so clearly he doesn't know anything about criminals.
So he lied about lying, about being a huge liar.
Come to think of it, I had actually probably about 5 or 6 years prior, seen Leonardo DiCaprio die on the open sea.
Ooh, that's rough.
Right.
And get in a big fight with a bear, too.
Mm-hmm. That would be later.
That bear had it coming.
One thing we learned about Grandma, though, here when she's coming clean about her past is the family stuff was not a lie. She was lying about a lot of things, but she really was going to see her daughter and her grandchildren and her son, who looks just like Rowdy and has that same kind of hair.
Short and brown.
He kind of brown. He really did get shot up to shit, and he really did die, and she really did have a fondness for Rowdy. It's not all a lie. The twist of the scene is the police re-enter the picture here, is that they're putting Grandma in her own cell and then letting Rowdy out of his. So that's not something Rowdy expected from Grandma's confession. He discovers that Grandma wasn't actually apprehended. She turned herself in, and in the process exonerated Rowdy.
Good, Grandma.
There's a little bit of a silver lining here at the end.
Fitting color, because Grandma's old.
Kind of like how the end of Better Call Saul happened. There's a little bit of that.
Yeah.
Like she gave herself up, after she could have gotten away with it. At this point, Rowdy is more willing to forgive Grandma, and they have another chat at the cell, and this time on the other side of it. And he says, like, look, Grandma, I forgive you. I love you. You're my grandma. I'm going to figure out a way to get you out of here. And Grandma's kind of a sad moment. She's like, Rowdy, I'm old. It doesn't even, like, whatever they give me, I'm going to die in here. It doesn't matter. Don't worry about it. Just go live your life. Go fuck Jane some more.
They may have to let her go if they get a third prisoner.
That's true. It's a pretty small jailhouse.
Well, the sheriff would just be like, now, Grandma, you can't leave town.
And Grandma's leaving town if we know anything about Grandma.
She'll wear a fake mustache. She doesn't give a shit.
So Rowdy leaves to meet up with Colonel Agee now that this whole thing is settled and at last conclude their transaction. Loose ends are tied up everywhere. Even Pop is forgiven as they kind of discover this is all a big thing Grandma did, and Pop is very old and got drugged. So everything seems to kind of be tying itself up, and happily ever after for some of the characters. Suddenly the sheriff races over and says, hey, where's the doctor? Grandma just had a heart attack in jail. You gotta come quick before she dies. So by the time the group gets there to go rescue Grandma, she is already gone. This was another ruse. She's not in the cell. She's outside, having stolen yet another carriage. And she screams some kind of insult at him.
Mule-eared, slap-sided womb tails.
That's the one.
I was hoping one of you would write that down. And then rides off safely away from her captors, I assume never to be found again.
Perfect ending.
Yeah.
One of my favorite little bits is when they're in the cell looking for her, one of the cop guys, can you call them cops? I guess.
Maybe as a constable.
Yeah, anyway, they're looking around and they look to the bed and there's, I don't know, a blanket, a very small blanket, and he ruffles it like Grandma could be under here.
Let's check between the floorboards.
Okay, so we know Grandma's gone. She got away with it. Did she end up with any of that money? Is she going to go off and get more money? What's next for Grandma?
Well, I think she definitely steals more stuff, but I do think they say something at the show like, you know, she also got away with so-and-so's money, maybe Ames's money or something, but she did leave with something.
So she got some part of her,
her
original,
booty.
This is I think, tonally perfect end to the episode. It's fun. Grandma shouldn't die in jail for any of this.
Yeah, that's a little harsh.
This is a lot more capery and antics than anything else. I think it was different tonally from our next episode, but I watched each of these twice.
Sure.
I liked them both more the second time. I think this episode was pretty fun and moved along at an okay clip, given the fact that it's a show this old and in this setting.
I was really surprised at how tolerable the pacing was, especially in this one.
Yeah.
Next one's a little confusing in parts, but this one, scene to scene, you could see that Grandma was moving the plot forward with her own crazy schemes that she was constantly hooking up.
I don't know if I agree to the pacing because
Well,
I didn't like the pacing at all. I was bored out of my mind this episode for long periods of time. Looking back on it, I can say I enjoyed this episode. I liked the plot, I liked the story, I liked some of the things they did.
You like Grandma.
I loved Grandma. But I think, I don't know, if this were a half-hour episode,
oh, yeah,
I would be way better.
Definitely. I never like 45-minute hour-long episodes as they aired on TV. I always think they always have some element of it where it's like, you could have taken that out.
Yeah.
But they had the slot to fill on TV, so they did what they
Exactly.
did. I agree with you there. I was saying in terms of when I'm thinking of a show this old, I was expecting a lot worse.
Yeah.
And the pacing was non-existent in Walton's episodes that were, a decade after this. So I was surprised that it was as breezy as it was.
I thought the tone of these was a lot more agreeable to me than the Walton's tone, too. There was a lot less, like, reveling in, everyday life of the good old days.
Yeah.
This was more like stuff was hard, but this also enables us to have a lot of interesting plot points we can put in. The Walton's was very light on plot.
Yeah, it sure was.
Wasn't a single fucking ghost in this episode.
That's true.
You know what I wondered in this episode?
I'm going to mark that down as a negative point, actually.
I found myself wondering, I wonder what the Pawnees would have to say about any of this. That's a spoiler for next week. We're going to talk about that and some other things that happened in Rawhide. No Clint Eastwood. So if you were only here, the person who I spoke to at the beginning who's listening to us for the first time, and you only turned this episode on because you love Clint Eastwood, and you're like, I want to hear him talk about Rowdy Yates. We're not doing that next week. We're talking about Rawhide, but it's not going to be with Clint Eastwood.
No, it's
We're going
Gil's
a different
time
direction.
to shine, and like 100 other people.
Gil Rockbody, whatever his name is. Something
Favor.
like that. Wow, I was off.
Gil
off by a
Favor.
lot.
Gil Rockbody.
What's the actor's name?
Eric.
Rockbody. Fleming.
With only one M. And anyone who is new to the show should know that you can find us in a lot of places on the internet. The Bootu boys, that is. We're on quite a few.
Pornhub.
We're on quite well. That we're working on that one. We need an OnlyFans too.
Oh, we do.
Yeah, we've got quite a few places you can find us at for real though. Van's hard at work putting these episodes on YouTube, so you can find us there. We have got a website, bootuinc.com, that you can go to. This is BOOTUINC, by the way, Bootu Inc. We also have a Patreon page. We have bonus content there. That's patreon.com/Bootu Inc. You can donate if you feel generous. Listen to our bonus content there.
Everything's free for now, but if you like us, leave a little money.
And you can give us a review too. Go to Apple Podcasts on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review if you're feeling especially generous.
We'll get a tattoo of Grandma.
Oh, sure. Yeah,
Where
that's
am I
the new
going to
one.
fit that with my other tattoos of Grandma?
Right above the Piranha's head one.
Yeah, I'll make it. I'll get a tattoo of Grandma with the piranha's head attached
That's
to
pretty
it.
cool.
Whoa.
Check us out on any of that if you want more of us in your life. And we'll be back, of course, next week, whether you want more of us in your life or not, because we're not done talking about Rawhide. You guys have anything else left to say? Something about Grandma or Rowdy, since we're not talking about either one next week?
I've got some stuff to round up.
Got some cattle?
Yeah, no, it's just some other stuff to round up.
Oh, okay. What about the cattle, though?
I don't have any cattle, so we'd better go so we can go round some stuff up.
Beef.
Rawhide.